I am a f***ing dragonfly biologist. I am so useless. I have nothing to help these people, and I have to figure out like a way to be relevant. I would like to think of myself as a reasonably well-medicated optimist. So,
well, can you put in the chat box what you use? I mean, I think Tom and I both need it. So, I mean, we certainly know that it's, scotch. If climate change is the shark, then water's the teeth.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. It makes me, like want to pull out my teeth and gum people a little bit.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the latest edition of The Stream, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation featuring guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarni, a water strategy advisor and investor, doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And a big thanks to our sponsor, Acciona from Spain, and our impact partners for bringing you this podcast today. And we are delighted to be joined by Dr. John Matthews, who is the co-founder and executive director of the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, also known as AGWA or AGWA. John, good to see you, and thanks for joining us on the stream.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Great stuff. So, John, I think on behalf of Will and myself, we're really looking forward to perhaps where this conversation could go over the
not
next.
Terrified in the least.
No, maybe a slight mix of apprehension and excitement. But I think we just want to sort of get into it in terms of your why, and actually as the co-founder of sort of AGWA, sort of what led you, that origin story to sort of led you to co-found that organization, to actually why it exists today.
It's a bit of a long, twisted story that I'll try to keep as short and entertaining as I can. I'd say generally I'm a late bloomer. I studied cultural anthropology, ethnomusicology in college, and I went into publishing for about a dozen years. I worked as a book editor and worked in sales and in the corporate publishing world. All nonfiction, nothing to do with water, nothing to do with science. But I woke up one day and I said, I'm not making a difference in my work. I subscribe to The Economist. I read the New York Times. And I'm kind of a passive person in history, and I feel like I'm outside of the great issues of our time. And I had always had a strong affinity. I think part of my interest in anthropology was the kind of natural history of humanity. But I was also grew up with a really strong interest in natural history per se, and I ended up leaving publishing, much to the puzzlement of my colleagues and managers, not to mention clients, and saying I'd like to get a PhD in ecology. And I left and I started working on dragonfly migration. I'm a dragonfly biologist.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And my it was hard for me to find a PhD advisor that I felt like was a good fit, mostly because I had no interest in being a part of a university, of being like a faculty member. That wasn't why I wanted to get a PhD. I wanted to have the credibility, almost the kind of union card of science, to be able to go in and say, this is something that I know, this is something that I have credibility in, and I should be able to engage with you as an advisor, as a peer, as a colleague, and talk. So I ended up, I didn't have a prior interest in climate change, but I selected a PhD advisor who she was one of the first generation of climate impacts ecologists, and she was like an early IPCC author. She was willing to, I was her first grad student. She was willing to have me as a student, even though I was necessarily not going to be productive in an academic sense. And that was the big shift. From there, I got a job with WWF. I got hired right out of grad school. This is around 2007. I got hired to start a freshwater climate adaptation program. Dragonflies are aquatic insects, and that was where I had my introduction really into the water world, into being a self-identified water person.
Hey, John, I love how you phrased your pivot, which is you did not want to be a passive person in history. And I've never heard anybody put it that way, in terms of, I mean, I would say almost every guest that we've had on, if not every guest, has always had that desire to have an impact and do something. And, that bias for action and, all that, but not being a passive person in history, that blows me away in terms of an elegant way to put why you do what you do. And, I would say why we all do what we do. So well done. You are an editor.
What a way to sort of articulate a career shift or a career pivot, right? Or taking another path. Some people's like, okay, I've done this for 20 years. I'm a bit bored, or they sort of reach a certain age. But actually this was, you don't want to be a bystander or a sort of a passive onlooker to the changes that happen to the world, and how can you sort of impact that yourself. So interesting on the route to WWF. So how did sort of AGWA come about off of that role?
I would say, to one of my favorite quotes is from a P.G. Woodhouse about sometimes we have an imperfect union of mind, and I was really excited to be working at WWF. I had what seemed like a fabulous budget. I had kind of a free reign, but there also was a kind of deep conflict maybe in the assumptions about what I was supposed to be doing in my work and the nature of a conservation organization. And I think it's we can touch back on it later. I think it's still an ongoing issue for lots of organizations, not just in the environmental world or in the conservation world, but it's something that I think is inherent to the kind of larger issues, the larger implications around climate change. So I felt like my job to start off with was mostly to kind of calm my anxiety, to not assume that I had answers as a scientist. When I talked with people, I had a crazy travel budget. Out of the 4,000 employees at WWF at the time, the only two people who traveled more than me were the head of WWF and a guy that worked in hydropower. So I was traveling, 200,000-300,000 miles a year. I had I was gone, for over 50% of the time. But mostly what I was doing was I felt like I was listening. I was hearing different kinds of experiences, often fears about climate impacts, and trying to kind of understand the scope and the breadth of the problem. And it was a very humbling process. Like I remember my very first trip was to India. It was literally about a week after I started at WWF, and there was a kind of a team meeting where I was going to be able to meet most of the people I was going to be working with over the next few years, and so I went on. This is my first trip to Asia, first time to meet all these people that I was working with. Half of them from outside of India got belly belly within the first 3 hours of arriving. I did not, which probably says something about the water quality in East Texas, where I grew up.
Okay, now we're going off the rails.
But I remember really vividly is we would have meetings, and then we would go see things that we thought were important for the next 5-year period for this funding cycle. And I was supposed to be the kind of scientific advisor on the project, the technical advisor, and one of the field trips was to a bridge over the Gambiri River. It's in northern India, and this particular bridge, it's about 2 kilometers long. It's enormous, and it's quite high over the riverbed too. And we're walking across it, and not only is there no water, there are large trees that are growing in the riverbed, and there's obviously not been water here for a long time. And we're hearing a little bit from some of our colleagues about why there's not water. Climate is presumed to be a significant part of it. But I remember thinking, oh, what can I bring from my experiences in grad school? I had a short postdoc too. Like, what is the literature telling me about this? And then I noticed these mounds that were in the riverbed, and they had blackened, burnt spots on top of them. And I leaned over to an Indian colleague and I said, "What are those? They're not. They're obviously made by somebody. They're not part of the hydrogeology." And she said, "Oh, those are cremation mounds." And people have come from sometimes hundreds of kilometers because the Gambiri is a tributary for Ganga, for the Ganges, and they're hoping that that water will come back to this river so that their ashes can join with the Ganges and then reach the Bay of Bengal, and their souls can receive absolution at that point. And I thought, I am a dragonfly biologist. I am so useless. I have nothing to help these people, and I have to figure out like a way to be relevant. It was very humbling. I'd been thinking about hydrology and climate change when, like the people that really cared about this river, they were thinking about God and climate change. And it was a very very humbling moment for me.
Okay, so that's like my second favorite quote in the past like 5 or 6 minutes, and I won't drop the F-bomb again, but you know which quote I'm referring to. So these are like pivotal moments in terms of, like why AGWA essentially, and what you do for a living in the scheme of things.
Well, I think one of the insights that came fairly quickly was that especially in conservation, especially with WWF, that mostly I was dealing with kind of a lower basin issues, in effect, that they were downstream issues. These were kind of fully formed projects, and you could only really bring in a climate component like around the edges.
Right. Well, so how do you feel now in terms of not being a passive person in history? Do you believe you're having an impact? And, what's your, yeah, I mean, what's your read in terms of, moving the needle, so to speak, and having a positive impact? And I want to use this as a segue to talk about COP and, what the networking event looks like in terms of actually having an impact.
Well, that might take me up to 2010. I become really frustrated, I think, with the system in which I'd found myself. It wasn't WWF's fault. It wasn't anybody's fault, really. It was, but I felt like I was at the kind of a wrong unit of analysis, and A colleague emailed me out of the blue one day, and he said he was in the Danish government. He said, I have a friend at the World Bank, and he's trying to organize a small workshop at World Water Week in Stockholm this year. He's an economist. He's really interested in climate change.
And he might be.
It might be Diego Rodriguez.
Oh my God. Now we've turned this into a game show. It's great.
So Diego, he's from Uruguay in South America. He's a senior economist at the World Bank still. And he was trying to reorient the World Bank water program to really decide if is climate change a big problem, is it a small problem for our water investments? How do we bring in a climate perspective? How do we see risk? How do we address it, reduce it? And he and I touched base. I was just about to disappear into Tibet at the time, and Diego said, seems like your this is back when people had Rolodexes. Your Rolodex is different than mine, but it complements mine. And can maybe we can organize this meeting together. So he and I first met about an hour before the meetings started on the Saturday before World Water Week that year. We invited about 30 people, about 40 showed up. The hotel kicked us out 2 hours after the meeting was supposed to be over. And we went to a bar, and then we went to a restaurant, and then we went to another bar. And at the end of it, like, we had a charter. Like we said, like, actually, we need each other so much on this issue that we have to basically crowdsource this as a way to work on those upstream issues that had been such a big gap for me in my.
And so, John, knowing both of you, I have to believe that bar hopping is embedded in the charter. Is that factual or not, or is that just
It's one of the methodologies that we work through.
I love it. I love it. It's like a charrette. We're gonna go to a few bars, and we're gonna create something. Here we are, in February 23, and you've been actively engaged in history, creating history now, which sounds like it's where you want to be. What's your take? You think things are moving along in the right direction? Do you think that water hitching its wagon to climate change is a good thing? And the whole shark teeth meme that is dominating the dialogue right now. Like, what's your unvarnished opinion, John Matthews? Let it rip.
As an individual, I have to say I was pretty depressed for a while, and I'd say up until maybe around 2012, 2013, about climate change. I really had seen I think maybe a side effect of all that travel was that I was often going to places that were really hurt, that were really disturbed. I think I had a really strong narrative about the sense of loss, and also a strong sense that we, especially in the water community, that we had a real gap in terms of our tools, our own ability to be able to provide the kind of much of water. I think one of the things that's interesting about water is it's that what draws us in as individuals are the issues, but it often immediately becomes like a kind of a technical story too, in hydrology or engineering or planning or economics or the law even. Like that, those are all really powerful, interesting stories, and this kind of issues and technical dialogue is really critical to how we think about water, and you can't separate those.
That's not what I expected you to say. And not to put words in your mouth, because I know I can't, but I thought you would have said it's about people. So, going back to your experience in India, and the reason I bring it up is that, everything that's going on in the Colorado River Basin right now, sort of epic failure, if you will. I'm really struck by the personal stories that I'm beginning to see in the media in terms of, communities without water, farmers that, are losing their livelihoods and so on. So I mean, I agree with that, it sort of core technical issues, but I'm struck by the emergence of personal stories to make the point that climate change is very real. And it's having a real impact on individuals. And Tom, you're in this world. I mean, what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, storytelling, it has to resonate, and I think people are sort of sick and tired of hearing that the world is ending in this pessimistic headlines, right? I think it's true, right? I mean, I think, but actually, I like the point you said, John, in terms of almost the systems and the way we've done things over the past are quite far removed from the actual impact from the people being directly affected on the ground. And it was when you had that conversation with the Indian lady about actually these are ashes, and actually that spiritual connection, that is so far removed from perhaps boardrooms over in New York looking at the impact of their operations, right? I mean, the connection is absolutely huge. So but yeah, I mean, yeah, storytelling and getting more people connected to this topic is going to be absolutely fundamental moving forward. So, but one thing I wanted to sort of speak to you about, John, is everyone is talking about this one word. I know you have quite strong opinions on it, so please, using Will's words, let her rip. Resilience. This R word, it comes up time and time again. It seems there's not a conference or event that goes by where the focus is on resilience. The panels are talking about whether it's utility leaders, whether it's solution providers trying to contribute to more resilient society. But I know you have quite strong views on that in terms of perhaps the misunderstanding on what resilience is and actually how we're going to get there.
Yeah, I do have strong feelings about it. It's a word that has arrived, I would say, actually late to the climate change discussions. I think the dominant term was really adaptation until maybe around 2018 in the climate community, and then resilience has come in, and I think there's some good reasons that it's come in. It's a kind of different alignment of thinking, a different tradition that's moved in, but it's a highly imperfect word. One of my other favorite stories is also from an early trip to China, where I've been traveling around, often speaking to crowds through a translator, and at the end of this trip, I gotten to know the translators over a week or so. They turned to me and they said, we keep translating this word resilience for you, but we have to tell you that in Mandarin it doesn't really mean very much. And I said, well, it's okay. It doesn't mean very much in English either.
That's great. Okay, my third favorite quote.
I've got a collection. Yeah.
And so I think like I actually have done a little bit of research, because I as sort of a word nerd by early professional standing. The traditional meaning of resilience is the idea that we bounce back from something, that you recover. It's almost in like technical language, you'd say it's DRR. That you want to get back to the way you were before something bad happened. And I think one of the reasons why I have really changed how I view about climate change, and that I think that drives a lot of my optimism, is that I think that the key message around climate change needs to be reorganization. That it's that we have this narrative, especially in journalism, of loss, and I think a word that you all use quite a bit is disruption. But I would say, even when you use disruption, you often use it in a positive way in this pod. I would say that what you're really talking about is a reorganization, a reorientation. And so there's a disassembly and a reassembly that happens. And what we see is actually a narrative, I think, of ecological, hydrological, even economic reassembly that's happening right now. And as a transition point, that is incredibly painful. It's very stressful. We are losing things, but there will also be other positive things on the other side of it.
So this is beyond even a recalibration, which is slightly changing the course with which you're talking about, fundamentally restarting, reorganizing the way we've done system, society to sort of for a sustainable future.
That's right. I think that and this is where, especially in your background as a journalist, I think this is where my narrative is very different than the kind of dominant narrative that you see in journalism. I think journalists often kind of describe climate change as at least a severe disease, possibly a terminal disease that has no treatment. And whereas I would say it's more like diabetes, and we have something that we need to monitor, we need to manage, but my kids can still have a better life than me, and we can. I may be able to reduce those symptoms. I may even be able to have it not be a major impact on my life. So I think. Our work in AGWA, the reason I feel most positive is we have moved from the kind of downstream issues about kind of worrying about how to nudge a particular project a little bit, from saying, let's focus on the big issues, let's focus on the big drivers. How do we make sure that we're bringing this kind of transformation perspective into finance, into how we define the whole project of economic development, the way that we transition from simply preserving ecosystems to saying, let's manage them forward into the conditions where they need to be headed.
That is, it's really an interesting perspective on all this, and I love the word reorder because it's a very different thinking than. Yeah, it's gloom and doom and terminal, and it's serious, certainly, but it's something that hopefully we can manage and adjust to and ultimately thrive with. Yeah, interesting perspective and counter to the prevailing narrative.
Do you think, John, just coming back to the R word, we should call it resilience, right? It's the ability to bounce back, but bounce back better than how you were before that significant event or that anomaly, whether it's a 100-year storm, etc., right? To be stronger than you were prior. But do you think a lot of the understanding around resilience is on the infrastructure and kind of the hard engineering in terms of resilience, whereas actually the societal side, the resilience of people, of the workforce, in light of the increased stresses, is probably equally important as part of that wider picture than, putting up flood defenses?
I think that's exactly right. There's a former head of the State Department in the U.S. In the last administration that he kind of famously said, he was the former CEO of Exxon, and he said climate change is essentially an engineering problem. And I think what he's articulating very well is a mindset that we need to treat climate change as a de-risking issue. It's there are all of these other things that we're de-risking for, and climate change is just another little piece that we need to add on at the end. And I've generated my own a suite of de-risking processes too, but I think resilience, at least as it should be, the kind of better world for that word, the new and improved version of resilience, needs to encompass that actually these are much more fundamental issues. That I was very moved last last June at an intersessional meeting of the UNFCCC in Bonn. It's not like the big annual COP meetings. It's a between meeting that happens at the midpoint between each COP, and the adaptation has always been kind of a small issue, especially in the plenary settings. And they, while I was there, they were launching a discussion. What should a global goal of adaptation be? It's called the GGA, the Global Goal of Adaptation. And the hope is that you can come up with a number, like we have for climate mitigation, for carbon issues, that like we need to shoot for 1.5 degrees Celsius, and everything else kind of follows from that. Adaptation and resilience issues are not like that. They cut much deeper. They're much more complicated. They're much more about trade-offs and choices within limits. But what you heard these delegates talking about from the Maldives, from Zambia, from all over the world, they said what we are concerned about is transformation. These kind of deep, persistent, big changes. That's not de-risking. And it's
Right.
about getting ready for the big things that all of us feel that we know that are coming. And the difference, I think, between me and Greta is Greta basically is yelling game over. She's saying it's already too late. We can't do anything about it. We just have rage left now. We can just be angry about it. And I want to say, I'm not willing to give up on my son yet. I think my son can have a better life than me, and I'm willing to help him.
How do you really feel about Greta?
I feel I wish she'd go to grad school and get an engineering degree.
That was really well put. You sort of dodged that one a little bit. Yeah.
But do you think,
Good.
and you sort of came back to how a lot of journalists look at this issue, John, and Greta to one side, there's a lot of the narrative is the kind of the finger pointing and the blaming, so to say you've caused this, you're part of this carbon legacy. As I mentioned, it's that sort of dystopian, quite negative view, right? Whereas I like to think what we do here on the stream and in the content is there are the solutions out there. We should be me and Will, we like to use this phrase stubborn optimists. And I think that's incredibly powerful to align everyone moving forward.
I would like to think of myself as a reasonably well-medicated optimist. So,
well, can you put in the chat box what you use? I mean, I think Tom and I both need it. So, I mean, we certainly know that it's, Scotch, but, what more?
Just Scotch twice daily in a 50 milliliters. Fine. Yeah. Not, of course, just as disclaimer to sponsors and partners, we do not advocate heavy drinking on the stream.
and driving.
Exactly. Operating heavy machinery, working under the influence of alcohol.
But you would be open to sponsorship from, say, a whiskey company.
Yes.
That's a really good idea, John. Do you
want
to come and work on the sponsorship team?
Well, no water, no whiskey, or vodka or whatever. So, God, you're a brilliant guest, John, really. I mean, you've propelled us into the future.
Well, this idea that we, that there are really, that there's a gap between the solutions that we're proposing for the most part, that we often hear, and the solutions that we sense, most of us, I think, especially young people, that we really need. I think that's become one of the most recent drivers for me personally in my own work, and I feel like there are a lot of really impressive untold stories there, and I would really like to have these other narratives come out. I also think that I think part of what's driving the journalism is what we in the U.S. would call rubbernecking. That we if you see an accident on the highway, people often slow down so they can look at it. They want to see like the bad thing that's there. Whereas I think what we need to do is actually keep our eyes on the road, and we need to keep looking forward. And there are very impressive, very positive, very large, at scale, positive projects that are emerging.
I love that. I think we should probably have you back on, John, to sort of get a reading of this in a couple of years to see if we all agree. Perhaps a narrative and some of the reports have moved towards a more optimistic sort of narrative.
John, will you be at UN Water Week, or whatever it is referred to these days? You know, the networking event in New York, sponsored by the UN.
I love the way you described that there, Will.
Well,
you sounded so.
So what? Go ahead, Tom. Say it out loud.
Yeah, a nice, healthy dose of cynicism.
Hey, I'm a New Yorker, so it's like built in.
Sorry, I interrupted. Yeah, John, will you be going to the UN Water Week?
I will, and one of the things that I think is a big gap in what I've seen so far. I don't know how it's going to play out on the ground, but I actually feel like the SDGs are kind of a limitation in how we're framing the conference. I think that there's an old saying in New England and in the US that good fences make good neighbors, and I think the SDGs have a strong tendency to maintain fences between long-standing silos, and climate change is one of the ironies of the past decade is that the SDGs became active about 2 months before the Paris Agreement became active. And so you have the NDCs that are happening on the global stage at the same time as the SDGs. The SDGs mention water a lot, but really only in this kind of narrow sense of wash. And the NDC, the Paris Agreement at least, doesn't mention water at all. But in practice, the NDCs have all become about water. And that's the more powerful framework, I think, that we need to actually be focusing on.
I mean, didn't the Paris Agreement build in the the narrative of if climate changes the shark, then water's the teeth?
Yeah, I hear that a lot. It makes me like want to pull out my teeth and gum people a little bit.
This is good. This is really good. Now you're
come on, John. Let's go. Come on.
It took 45 minutes.
Yes, water is. It's been very well said. Mike Muller and Claudia Sadoff, I think, said more or less the equivalent of that first back around 2009 or so. That water is the medium that will experience most of the negative climate impacts from. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of teeth idea. But what I feel like I've come to understand is that the reverse of that is actually true too. That actually water is the medium of resilience. That it's not the water sector. It's water that connects all the sectors. And that's a really powerful idea, right? And it's one that I hear from the climate community. I don't hear it so much from the water people. I hear it from the climate community. I've worked with over 100 countries on their NDCs. And what I've heard from many of those folks, what I've heard from the UNFCCC itself, is that all of my problems are water problems, and I would say all of your solutions are water solutions as well.
Yeah, that's a good way to flip it around. I was sort of poking the bear a little bit with you because I believe there's this illusion that if you solve climate change, you will solve water, and right. That is just flat out not true, and it misses issues like environmental justice and WASH. Infrastructure issues, public policy. I mean, the American West, it's been broken for, 100 plus years. So, that sort of candor in terms of, it's not a simple saying. It's a lot more complex. So let's come up with a more nuanced view of what are the solutions, which is what I'm hearing from you.
Well, and I think you mentioned the Colorado earlier. I mean, I clearly that's the kind of framing that we need in the Colorado right now. The challenge is not to just get used to the way water conditions are in 2023. The challenge is when a 1,200-year drought becomes a 1,500-year drought or a 2,000-year drought, and that's it's not adjusting to now. There's a lot of what I would call adjustment instead of climate adaptation. And what we need to be able to do is actually think over a much longer time frame and for a much wider range of conditions than we do now. And that's completely within our capability. And it's also it goes back to your point, Tom. Like, is it an engineering problem? In part, it totally is. But it's also a livelihoods issue. It's an ecosystem issue. It's a governance issue, and we need, if there's I think one of the first kind of positive indicators that I saw around climate change, and this was very early in my time at WWF, is as an ecologist, like I could sit down and talk to people that I never would have been able to talk to before because they were scared about climate change, and that was bringing them to a place where they said, this problem is bigger than me, it's bigger than my discipline, it's bigger than my institution, and so I need to have a kind of shared vision. I need to have I need other people on my team. I have the wrong team. That's very positive, just all by itself.
So Tom, when do we schedule session 2 with John? You want to just roll into it now?
Do you guys have a hard stop? I feel like we're kind of, John's just getting warmed up here, right? But
yeah, unfortunately I have a hard stop, but I don't want to stop. So, because I do believe we're just getting warmed up and into the heart of the issues and on a positive note, the solution. So, to your point about, you believe your son can have a better life. Well, that's a good thing. That propels people forward. It's very personal. And I say we tee that up for the next chat.
I agree. Maybe in New York.
Oh, and over whiskey, perhaps.
By which time John may have a sponsor lined up. The stars are aligning perfectly.
Oh, you're a genius, young man.
If we had Diego, and we'd probably find a mezcal sponsor. So,
okay, book it.
There we go. Gold and platinum level sponsorships. Brilliant. Well, John, I agree with Will. I think we should definitely have you back on for sort of part 2, but some really interesting food for thought, and having sort of spoken with you and looked at your previous speaking stuff, I think a lot of the stuff is around the adaptation, security, but actually hearing your personal journey and those kind of aha moments, especially in India, was really interesting, I think. So best of luck for the future in AGWA, and I think you are having an impact that you quite rightly sought back in the time when you wanted that change. So
well, thanks. It's been a pleasure speaking with both of you. I apologize for dropping an F-bomb. I definitely ripped varnish off when we were going unvarnished.
John, it comes with a warning label exactly for that purpose. So no apologies needed. But listen, thank you so much. So we've really enjoyed the conversation, and we'll be in touch for part 2 soon.
Okay. Be well. We'll see you in New York.
Sounds great. Yeah, you take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.